Headlines spread like wildfire. Canada slashes potato exports to the US by 40%, while landing a billion-dollar deal with Asia. It sounded explosive, tailor-made for outrage. But when reporters dug deeper, the story crumbled. Canada's Agriculture Ministry called it flat-out false, and trade analysts confirmed there was no secret billion-dollar pact, no mass rejection of US shipments. Still, the rumor tapped into something real, an undercurrent of anxiety running through North America's potato trade. For years, this humble crop has been a quiet foundation of cross-border commerce, feeding French fry factories in Alberta and Idaho alike. Yet today, the whispers of tariffs, quarantines, and premium Canada branding raise questions about who really controls the future of this industry. So what's the truth behind the hype? Are North America's potato giants facing a real fracture or just fighting shadows? For decades, the potato trade between the United States and Canada looked like a model of agricultural harmony. Trucks crossed the border daily, carrying Canadian frozen fries south and American seed varieties north. The numbers told a simple story of interdependence. Canada exported more than 2.7 billion Canadian dollars in frozen fries and nearly $500 million in fresh potatoes, with the US serving as its undisputed top market. On the other side, American growers leaned on Canadian processors like McCain and Cavendish, which turned raw crops into global fast food staples. From French fry chains in New York to diners in Saskatchewan, the supply chain felt seamless, efficient, and mutually beneficial. But even in this apparent golden age, small cracks began to form. The 2021 discovery of potato wart in Prince Edward Island brought sudden quarantines and restrictions. Disputes over phytosanitary rules and chemical residue limits, known as SPS and MRL barriers, added friction. And as Japan and South Korea tightened access, US exporters grew frustrated, while Canadian firms eyed Asia with more ambition. What once looked like an unshakable trade bridge now carried the weight of suspicion, regulation, and the looming threat of tariff crossfire. When the United States looks at the potato trade, the calculus isn't just about fries or chips, it's about leverage. American policymakers see agriculture as a front line in broader trade disputes, a bargaining chip to pressure neighbors or open new markets overseas. Over the last decade, Washington has pushed aggressively to expand U.S. potato access beyond North America. Mexico was the crown jewel. After 25 years of legal wrangling, U.S. growers finally won full nationwide access in 2022, with USDA estimating $250 million in potential annual sales. Emboldened, industry lobbyists set their sights on Japan, the world's second-largest potato import market. Yet Tokyo's regulators refused to open their borders to fresh American spuds, citing plant health concerns. That rejection stung. In response, the US doubled down at home, scrutinizing its northern neighbor even more closely. Canadian shipments, especially from Prince Edward Island, were placed under heavy inspection after the potato wart discovery. Meanwhile, whispers of tariffs circulated in Washington as officials hinted at broader agricultural retaliation in ongoing disputes unrelated to potatoes. The National Potato Council warned that new barriers could destabilize a supply chain worth billions. At the same time, U.S. acreage shrank slightly, down to 912,000 acres in 2025, according to USDA, while frozen inventories piled up by 3% compared with the previous year. The result was a dangerous contradiction, an industry desperate to grow exports, but facing oversupply pressures at home, pushing Washington to act more forcefully in ways that rattled Ottawa. Canada, for its part, read the American moves as heavy-handed. Ottawa's officials bristled at the constant inspections and the lingering ban on PEI seed potatoes. Prince Edward Island's farmers, already reeling from quarantines, felt unfairly targeted despite Canada's National Action Plan to contain potato wart. The federal government even funded land buybacks in the affected zones, underscoring how seriously Canada treated the risk. Yet from Canada's perspective, the US was moving the goalposts, keeping restrictions in place not because of science, but because of politics. Rather than retreat, Canada leaned into its strengths. Cavendish Farms invested $150 million in expanding its Jamestown, North Dakota facility in 2025, a symbolic move showing that Canadian firms could thrive on both sides of the border. McCain Foods accelerated its strategy in Asia, supplying premium fries to fast-growing markets like China and South Korea, where urbanization and dining out trends fueled demand. Official trade data reinforced Canada's resilience. In 2024, the country exported over 509,000 tons of fresh potatoes, worth more than 511 million Canadian dollars, only modestly below its record year in 2023. This was the essence of Canada's counterpunch, positioning itself as the supplier of premium, reliable potatoes while painting US policy as erratic. Officials in Ottawa highlighted that while American dehydrated and chip exports were slipping, Canadian frozen fries were still climbing. The message was subtle but clear. If Washington wanted to politicize potatoes, Canada would brand itself as the steady hand, the trustworthy partner for Asia and beyond. For Canadian farmers, this was not just about trade, it was about national pride, about proving that their reputation could withstand American pressure. And so, by mid-2025, the potato trade had hardened into a paradoxical stalemate. On paper, neither side had launched a formal tariff war, nor had exports collapsed by 40%, as the viral rumor claimed. But the undercurrents told a different story. American farmers feared oversupply, watching inventories stack up as international doors remained closed. Canadian growers worried that any flare-up over phytosanitary standards could trigger sudden bans or restrictions. Both sides were walking a tightrope, balancing economic interests with political posturing. The dilemma ran deeper than agriculture. For Washington, to relent on Canadian potatoes would look like weakness in trade disputes. For Ottawa, to concede on seed bans or SPS measures would mean betraying its farmers, especially those in PEY, who had already endured years of lost markets. In this sense, the potato had become a symbol of the broader US-Canada dynamic, partners tied at the hip but forever sparring over rules, fairness, and who truly benefits. Neither country could simply walk away. The US needed Canada's processing giants, while Canada needed access to America's enormous consumer base. Yet every truck crossing the border now carried a shadow of uncertainty, every shipment haunted by the possibility of new restrictions. The rumor of a billion-dollar Asian deal may have been false, but it captured a real truth. The North American potato trade was entering a moment where trust was eroding and where both sides faced a confrontation without an easy exit. For Canadian farmers, the US scrutiny of PEI potatoes wasn't an abstract policy. It was a direct hit to their livelihoods. Prince Edward Island, a province where potatoes account for nearly a third of its agricultural output, became the epicenter of the crisis. When the potato wart discovery in 2021 led to the suspension of exports, farmers saw truckloads of produce stalled at the border and contracts vanish overnight. Even after Ottawa negotiated partial reopenings in 2022, seed potatoes remained banned, cutting off a lucrative niche market that many growers had depended on for decades. By 2025, the provincial government had launched land buyback programs, compensating farmers in affected zones and trying to restore confidence. Yet the scars remained. Beyond PEI, the uncertainty rippled through Canada's processing giants. Cavendish Farms and McCain Foods had to navigate heightened inspection regimes and the looming threat of new US tariffs. These firms had invested heavily in expanding capacity, betting on stable access to the US and growing demand in Asia. Now every shipment carried the risk of delay or rejection. The numbers underscored the stakes. In 2024, Canada exported more than 509,000 tons of fresh potatoes, worth over 511 million Canadian dollars. Even a modest disruption of 10% could erase tens of millions in revenue. For rural communities in Alberta, Manitoba, and PEI, where potatoes sustain jobs from truck drivers to factory line workers, the tension wasn't about billion-dollar deals in Asia. It was about whether the family farm could survive another year of political crossfire. On the American side, the costs were no less tangible. For all of Washington's tough talk, U.S. growers found themselves squeezed between oversupply at home and locked doors abroad. The USDA reported that in 2025, frozen potato inventories were 3% higher than the year before, even as acreage planted fell by 2%. Prices stagnated, and processors struggled to move product in a market where demand for chips and dehydrated products had softened. For Idaho and Washington State, heartlands of the U.S. potato industry, this was a recipe for financial strain. The problem wasn't just domestic. When U.S. officials hinted at tariffs or tightened inspections on Canadian shipments, downstream industries paid the price. Fast food chains, which rely heavily on Canadian frozen fries, faced higher costs and tighter supplies. A delay at the border could ripple across franchises nationwide, turning into shortages that frustrated customers and cut into margins. American consumers, too, began to feel the pressure. While retail prices for fresh potatoes remained stable, processed products like fries and chips flirted with price hikes as distributors hedged against supply chain uncertainty. The missed opportunities abroad made the pain sharper. Mexico's opening in 2022 was a bright spot, but negotiations with Japan remained stalled, keeping a market worth up to $200 million annually just out of reach. Every time Tokyo said no, growers in the Pacific Northwest saw another season of surplus. As one trade analyst put it, the US was losing ground, not because we can't produce, but because we can't get in the door. In this sense, the shared cost was clear. American farmers faced shrinking margins and global roadblocks, while consumers and businesses paid more for less certainty. The rumor of Canadian billion-dollar wins was false, but the reality of American losses was undeniable. North America's potato trade now stands at a precarious crossroads. The United States, burdened by oversupply and global barriers, and Canada, scarred by quarantines, yet buoyed by its processing giants, find themselves locked in a partnership that feels more like a contest. Neither side can afford to break away. Their industries are too intertwined, their farmers too dependent, their consumers too demanding. But with every rumor, every inspection, and every stalled negotiation, trust erodes further. The question is no longer about potatoes alone. It is about whether two neighbors can manage their shared prosperity without turning agriculture into a weapon. Will cooperation prevail, or will the next crisis turn this staple food into the symbol of a fractured continent? Like, comment, and subscribe.